Welcome back, my friends. Let's take a look at Felix 5 Boots, the alternate commander from the Grand Larceny Precon. You can cast Felix for 2, a black, a green, and a blue. You get a 5/4 Ooze Rogue with Menace and Ward 2, and that ability reads, if a creature you control dealing combat damage to a player causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, so he is a combat damage Harmonicon. Now, if you're like me, you're not going to wait until April 19th to start brainstorming ideas for this commander, and it just so happens I have a few cards, each under about $1 you can pick up now, to start building around this awesome new commander. First up is Graveblade Marauder. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. I feel like this can be pretty good if you have a self-mill sub-theme. Now, to generate a ton of mana, we have Sakiko, Mother of Summer. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get that much green mana, and until end of turn, you don't lose that mana as steps and phases end. With Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel, whenever he deals combat damage to a player, he gets a chorus counter, then we can draw and discard a card. If he has 4 or more chorus counters, we can cast the discarded card for free. And Doomscar Warrior, whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we can look at that many cards from the top of our library. He really helps us out digging for creatures or land cards. Now, if you are more interested with going with a +1/+1 counter theme, we have a few cards for you. Froghemoth can help us with some graveyard hate as well as growing himself. Briar Hydra can deal combat damage and throw some 1/1 counters on our creatures. Conclave Sledge Captain has backup 1 3 times, so whenever those creatures deal combat damage to a player, they'll get quite a few more 1/1 counters. Of course, we can't overlook Drana, Liberator of Malakir. She has First Strike, and whenever she deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. And a card that I really didn't know existed until I started looking for those that trigger on combat damage, we have Ayara's Oathsworn. Whenever she deals combat damage to a player, if it had fewer than 4 1/1 counters on it, it gets a 1/1 counter. Then if it has exactly 4 1/1 counters, we can search our library for a card, so this is potentially a repeatable tutor. Now, if you don't like 1/1 counters, let's create some tokens. We have Inquisitor Eisenhorn. We're going to focus on that second bit of text. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we can investigate that many times, which means we'll be generating a ton of artifact tokens. Now, we also have Spawn Writhe. Whenever it deals combat damage, it can clone itself, and Living Hive. Whenever it deals combat damage, it will give us a ton of 1/1 insects. Now, if you prefer to steal your opponent's stuff, you could run a Fiend of the Shadows or a Thief of Sanity to cast our opponent's spells. If you play your cards right, with Memory Vampire, you can cast a target non-land card from the defending player's graveyard for free. And whenever a creature equipped with the Whisper Steel Dagger deals combat damage to a player, we can cast a creature spell from their graveyard. Now, you could also run Zareth San the Trickster. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we can get a permanent card from their graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. And a personal favorite of mine, Grima, Saruman's Footman. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, they exile cards until they hit an instant or sorcery, and then we can cast that spell for free. Now, if you want to run the theme that your opponents will love the most, you could run a discard-themed deck and include a bunch of creatures like Banshee of the Dread Choir, Ghoul Draw's Spectre, Dimir Cutpurse, Blizzard Spectre, Liliana's Reaver, Headhunter, Silent Spectre, Okiba Gang Shinobi, and Una's Blackguard that can all deal combat damage to players and make them discard. And as the cherry on top, we have Larceny. Simply put, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, they have to discard. So let's double up those effects and take away all of our opponent's cards. And there you have it, my friends, a few budget cards you can start picking up now if you wanted to build around Felix 5 Boots when he drops on April 19th. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.